My name is Lena Moretti, and I was 28 years old the first time I truly realized that being dependable doesn't make anyone love you, it only makes them expect you. I spent years believing that if I kept my head down, paid the bills, helped wherever I could, and quietly fixed problems no one else noticed, I'd earn their respect. Or at least, their gratitude. Turns out, I was wrong. It all hit me one Friday evening at my sister's birthday dinner. The restaurant had those warm, golden lights that make everyone look softer than they are, marble tables that gleamed under the candlelight, and a piano playing something classical and familiar in the corner. She had chosen the place, La Trattoria del Sol, a restaurant where menus didn't list prices, and where even the tap water came with a story about the spring it came from. I arrived early to help the host settle the table, a habit I'd picked up over the years. My parents, cousins, and a few distant relatives were already there, laughing, sipping wine, and pretending to know each other's lives. The women were in designer dresses, their hair done like they'd stepped out of a magazine. The men were in crisp shirts and polished shoes. Everyone was glowing in the sense that money and celebration can give you. I, on the other hand, had driven an extra 20 minutes in heavy traffic just to make sure Amelia's parking spot was reserved and that the table had the right number of chairs. No one noticed. No one ever did. I slid into my seat beside her, and for a second, I watched the scene, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the way everyone leaned into each other as if they truly belonged. I had been the one footing half the bill, covering a part of her rent, and somehow making sure her life looked effortless. I smiled politely, nodding along to a story someone told about a work promotion I barely understood. Amelia, of course, was radiant. Always had been. Her smile wasn't the kind you could mistake for nervousness or shyness. It was confident, casual, and just a little arrogant. The kind of smile that made everyone believe she'd never truly had to worry about the consequences of her actions. I'd seen it my entire life. I'd known it. And somehow, I'd always been okay with it. Until that night. Midway through the meal, she stood up. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't raise her voice. She merely tapped her glass with her silver spoon and waited until the clatter faded. That familiar pause. The one that said, "Pay attention. Something important is about to be said." She looked directly at me. "To the family ATM," she said brightly, raising her glass so it caught the warm light. "May we all remember who really keeps the wheels turning in this family." The room froze. Then, like a wave, laughter erupted. Genuine, loud, and entirely unbothered by the weight of her words. My mother laughed first, covering her mouth with her hand like it was adorable. My father shook his head, pretending amusement. A few cousins exchanged knowing glances. Even a distant aunt I hadn't spoken to in years joined in, grinning like she finally understood some inside joke that I had lived for decades.
And me?
I sat there, my face heating up, my chest tightening, but my hands still.
I didn't say a word. Reacting had never helped. It never had. So I did what I always did.
I sipped my wine, nodded politely, and waited for the next conversation to sweep over me, pretending everything was normal. Only this time, it wasn't normal.
Because the joke wasn't just a joke. It was the truth.
And the truth hit harder than any insult or accidental humiliation I'd ever experienced. I was, in their eyes, just the reliable one. The one who fixed everything, who paid for everything, who made life easy for everyone else.
Not because they loved me, but because it was expected. Because I was useful.
I thought about all the times I had covered her mistakes. Rent that was late, tuition payments, car repairs, phone bills, groceries she forgot, emergencies she conveniently forgot to mention until it was too late. I thought about the quiet sacrifices that no one acknowledged, that no one even saw. And for the first time, I realized something I had been avoiding my entire adult life. I wasn't loved for who I was. I was loved only as long as I was convenient. I pushed back my chair slowly. The laughter around the table continued, oblivious. My sister's smile remained sharp and gleaming, perfectly untouched by any potential consequence. My parents and relatives were still chuckling, basking in the performance of a happy family dinner.
And in that moment, I made a decision. I would no longer be invisible.
I would no longer be the family's quiet solution to every problem. And if that meant standing alone, so be it. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and waited.
Not for permission. Not for courage.
Just for the right moment to reclaim what was mine. My dignity, my boundaries, my life. The dinner, the laughter, the warm lights, They were about to collide with a truth no one at that table was ready to hear. I set my glass down carefully, the smooth surface clicking against the table. Everyone's laughter seemed to echo louder, as if mocking the sudden weight settling over me.
I didn't look at my sister. I didn't look at my parents.
I just stood up, quietly, deliberately, and walked toward the exit.
The murmurs began immediately. Where's Lena going? Did she hear that? But I didn't stop. Not once.
The door handle was cold beneath my fingers as I opened it. Outside, the evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the city streets and the faint clatter of dishes from the restaurant. I inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in my head. I had spent years ensuring that my presence was almost invisible, except when it was required to fix something. But tonight, I realized visibility didn't equal value. Obedience didn't equal respect. My usefulness didn't equal love. The phone in my pocket buzzed immediately, almost as if it had been waiting for me to make a move. Calls, texts, notifications stacked one on top of another. My mother's name flashed repeatedly, followed by Amelia's, then my father.
I ignored them all.
My hand hovered over the screen for a moment before I forced it into my pocket again.
No. Not yet.
They didn't get to dictate the timing of my decision. I walked to my car, each step deliberate, each breath a reminder that I was reclaiming something I hadn't realized I had lost. The city hummed around me, but it felt muted, like I had slipped into a different frequency, one where I didn't have to respond, explain, or soothe anyone's panic.
The realization was liberating. And terrifying.
By the time I reached my apartment, the notifications had multiplied.
42 missed calls.
10 from my mother alone, 8 from my father, and the rest from Amelia, along with relatives who clearly had no idea how to navigate a crisis that didn't revolve around them. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear but with the weight of knowing that for once, there was no quick fix. No silent payment to smooth things over, no quiet intervention to erase a mistake I hadn't made.
This time, I was the fulcrum. And I wasn't moving.
Even as the texts continued to pour in, I forced myself to sit in silence. The buzzing of my phone became rhythmic, almost hypnotic, each vibration a reminder of the world I had chosen to step back from. I had spent years being the safety net for everyone else, and now, for the first time, there was no net. Around 8:30 p.m., headlights swept across my driveway.
I knew who it was before I even opened the door. My parents.
They stepped out of the car like they were rehearsing lines for a play, trying to make urgency and concern look natural. But I had seen through the rehearsals before. My mother's face was streaked with tears, her lips quivering in a way that I had learned to read over countless family dramas. My father followed closely, his expression a blend of exasperation and helplessness.
They didn't yell. They didn't demand. They pleaded.
Words tumbled out quickly, overlapping, frantic.
Amelia couldn't lose her apartment. She needed her car. Her tuition. How could I be so heartless? Didn't I care about my own sister?
My parents weren't angry, they were panicked. And in that moment, I realized something I had always suspected but never confirmed. They didn't see me as a person who deserved consideration. They saw me as a mechanism, one whose obedience and generosity could be relied upon, without question.
I let them in.
And for the first time in years, I told the truth. I told them about every rent check I had written, every tuition payment I had covered, every late-night emergency I had solved. I told them about the sacrifices I had made so their daughter could live comfortably, unaware of the cost. I told them that I had been the invisible hand, the silent provider, the quiet fixer of their family's problems.
The room was heavy with silence after my words.
My mother blinked, tears now quietly gathering, as though seeing something she had never bothered to notice. My father's jaw tightened, his usual calm shattered for the first time. Amelia, meanwhile, hovered near the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, like a student caught off guard by a teacher's reprimand but refusing to react. And then I said the words I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times, but never had the courage to voice. I'm done. I won't be responsible for everyone else's mess anymore. Their reactions were immediate. Shock, disbelief, and then a flood of arguments, pleas, and subtle manipulations. My mother reminded me that family helps each other. My father tried to convince me I was overreacting. Amelia whispered about how unfair I was being.
But none of it mattered.
I had stepped out of the cycle of obligation that had defined my life. I had chosen boundaries over compliance. As they left late that night, still hoping to twist my decision with guilt and love, I felt something I had never felt before. Not relief exactly, but a profound sense of liberation.
No one had forced me to continue giving.
No one had persuaded me to surrender my agency. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. Freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet act of refusing to be complicit in your own erasure. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications, calls, messages, all demanding attention, explanation, appeasement.
I didn't open a single one.
Instead, I silenced everything. Family chats, group texts, emergency alerts. I blocked them out. For the first time in years, the center of my world wasn't someone else's crisis.
I existed for me.
I made coffee, checked my emails, and lived a life unhinged from the weight of everyone else's needs. And yet, even in the quiet, I knew the storm wasn't over. Amelia would realize her safety net had vanished, and when she did, she'd panic. She'd come looking for the quick fix, expecting me to jump back in as always.
But she wouldn't find me there. Not tonight. Not anymore.
By mid-morning, the quiet I had created for myself began to feel surreal. No calls, no texts, no frantic notifications demanding immediate attention. The apartment felt emptier, but lighter, like the air itself had space to breathe. I brewed coffee slowly, savoring each sip, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond my windows. For the first time in years, my schedule, my priorities, and my peace weren't dictated by someone else's dependency. I knew, though, that this silence was temporary.
Amelia would notice eventually. She always did.
And when she did, panic would follow, swift, frantic, and entitled. The safety net I had provided for her was gone. No automatic payments, no quiet interventions, no invisible hands smoothing over her mistakes.
It was her problem now, not mine. 2 hours later, it began.
An email from the leasing office. Your account is overdue. Immediate action required to prevent eviction. My chest tightened, not with anxiety, but with a strange, calm satisfaction.
I had done nothing.
For once, I wasn't the one fixing it. Next came the university portal notifications, tuition payments reversed due to non-payment. And then, the car loan, a failure notice, bold and glaring. My phone buzzed relentlessly, but I stayed seated, drinking my coffee, observing, feeling the weight shift. By 9 a.m., I could hear Amelia's frustration ripple through our mutual contacts. Messages from friends, cousins, and even my Aunt Erica started trickling in, half disbelief, half gossip.
Is Lena serious?
Did she actually leave her high school project behind?
This can't be real.
Amelia's panic was palpable even in digital form.
I didn't respond. I didn't need to.
The collapse of her carefully maintained life was unfolding exactly as it needed to. Around mid-afternoon, my phone rang. 1, 2, 3 calls from Amelia.
I let them go.
Then text after text.
You can't do this. I didn't mean it like that.
Please, I'll fix it, I promise. The entitlement in her words was staggering, but familiar. She had spent her entire life believing I would fix anything, and now she faced the reality that I wouldn't. By early evening, the headlights appeared in my driveway again. My parents, alone this time, approached cautiously, as if walking into a minefield they had only just realized existed. I opened the door before they knocked. Their expressions were a mixture of fear, fatigue, and desperation. My mother clutched her purse tightly, knuckles white, while my father's face was pale, eyes darting around the room as if looking for a solution I no longer carried.
No words were spoken initially.
They laid out documents on my kitchen table, lease notices, tuition bills, car statements, each one highlighted, stamped, official. They were pleading, yes, but also strategizing, trying to convince me with logic and reason. Amelia was drowning, they said.
She needed help. Didn't I care? Didn't I understand the consequences?
I listened quietly, weighing their words, feeling the old urge to step in rise, and pushing it down just as deliberately. I took a deep breath and did what I had spent years avoiding. I asked for accountability. I asked for clarity. For the first time, I demanded that help be structured, documented, and respected, not assumed, not casually requested. A contract, I said.
Terms clear. Repayment agreed. No hidden expectations.
My parents' eyes widened, my mother's lip trembled, and my father's jaw tightened. You want us to sign a contract? My mother whispered, disbelief laced in every word.
This is your sister. Your family. Is this really necessary? Yes, I said simply.
Because for too long, this has been optional for me and mandatory for everyone else.
Not anymore. Their expressions hardened.
Amelia's name came up repeatedly, whispered with worry and panic, but I didn't flinch. I stayed calm, deliberate, unmoved by the guilt trips or the subtle hints of moral obligation they tried to layer onto my decision.
My peace depended on it.
Later that night, after they left without agreement, the silence returned. The weight in the apartment was different now, not heavy with anxiety, but charged with a new kind of freedom. I went about my usual evening routines: dinner, dishes, emails, and a long walk around the block.
Each step, each small action, was mine alone.
I wasn't responsible for anyone else's chaos anymore.
I was responsible only for myself.
Even the next day, Amelia's online presence betrayed her panic. Instagram stories of exaggerated stress, desperate pleas for understanding, and posts dramatizing her independence, all reminders that she hadn't accounted for the possibility of consequences. Friends chimed in, asking what had happened, trying to mediate, but I stayed quiet.
I let the reality unfold.
Her system had relied on me too long, it was finally unraveling, and I wouldn't stitch it back together. By evening, my phone buzzed again, a mix of messages and missed calls. But this time, I felt no compulsion to respond. I had learned something critical: the power of stepping back. To act only when necessary, not when expected. The boundaries I had finally drawn were sharp, deliberate, and uncompromising.
They weren't cruelty. They weren't vengeance.
They were simply honesty, acknowledgement that I was not merely a service, a resource, a family ATM. And as I sat in the quiet, watching the lights of the city blink through my window, I realized something that had eluded me all these years. Empowerment wasn't loud, flashy, or performative. It was the quiet, steadfast refusal to be taken for granted. The peace of knowing you are finally seen, not for what you can do, but for who you are. For the first time, I wasn't just Lena Moretti, the dependable one. I was Lena Moretti, someone who demanded respect. Someone who refused to be erased. Someone who had learned, painfully and finally, that boundaries weren't selfish, they were survival. The next morning, I woke to the quiet hum of the city outside my window. My phone had stopped buzzing, a rare reprieve, and I drank my coffee slowly, savoring the calm before the inevitable storm. I knew Amelia would realize, sooner rather than later, that the safety net I had provided for years no longer existed. And when she did, she'd come looking for a solution, expecting me to step in as I always had.
But not this time.
By mid-afternoon, the first emails began to trickle in again, each one a stark reminder that reality had consequences. The lease, the tuition, the car payments, all overdue, all urgent. I read them carefully, noting the red banners, the final warnings, the deadlines that now existed without my silent intervention.
I didn't panic. I didn't flinch.
I felt a quiet satisfaction, almost like watching dominoes topple exactly as they should. Shortly after, my parents arrived again, this time alone. They walked to the door cautiously, hesitating before knocking, as though the act itself carried a weight they hadn't anticipated. I opened it immediately, letting them step inside. No greetings, no small talk, just the papers, the bills, the tangible evidence of what happens when someone stops doing all the invisible labor for everyone else. "We need to talk," my father said, voice steady but strained. My mother clutched her purse as if it were a lifeline. I gestured toward the kitchen table, where they laid out the documents with precise care. Eviction notice, tuition balance, bank statements showing missed payments, and car payment failures. Each item highlighted, urgent, undeniable. They pleaded, softly at first. Amelia was drowning, my mother said.
She couldn't handle it alone. Didn't I understand how serious this was?
My father reminded me of family responsibility, of the role I had always played, of the expectation that I would fix things because that was what had always been done.
I listened, quietly, calmly.
I let them speak, let the weight of their reliance hang in the air.
And then, I spoke. "I will help," I said simply. "But on my terms.
With structure, accountability, and clear boundaries.
Nothing hidden. Nothing assumed. A contract. Signed by all parties. Terms agreed. Repayment scheduled. No excuses. No exceptions. Silence. My mother blinked, lips trembling. My father's eyes widened, jaw tightening. Their daughter, my sister, who had spent years relying on my interventions, was suddenly confronted with an unexpected rule. I would no longer solve her problems casually. She had to participate. She had to acknowledge the value of what I provided. They argued initially. The words came fast, overlapping, desperate. You're being cold. This isn't how family works. She's still learning. Be reasonable. But I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. My peace depended on it. For once, the power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't reacting to guilt. I was enforcing fairness. I was enforcing respect. After nearly an hour of back and forth, my mother finally reached for the contract. Her hands shook as she signed, each stroke deliberate. My father watched silently, resignation and disbelief in his eyes. And with that single action, the contract became a symbol, a boundary drawn clearly and permanently. It wasn't punitive. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability, in its purest form. Later that evening, I wired the full amount of what was needed to reset Amelia's situation. Rent, tuition, car payments. Every last overdue bill. I did it quietly, deliberately, without fanfare, without a word to anyone. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't need approval. I didn't want to hear Amelia claim some vague, performative thanks. The act itself was enough. The first messages that came afterward were telling. Amelia sent the usual stream of panic-tinged texts. I can't believe you did this. Why are you being so harsh? This isn't necessary, it's just one mistake. My mother chimed in shortly after. Please, sweetie, can we talk? She needs you. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Silence was my statement now. Boundaries were louder than words. Over the next week, I watched the ripple effects. Amelia's carefully curated life began to shift subtly. She learned that resources weren't infinite. She learned that mistakes had consequences. The power she had relied on me for no longer existed as an invisible safety net. My parents, meanwhile, oscillated between frustration, guilt, and reluctant acceptance. They had always depended on my compliance, and now they were learning that compliance had limits. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, unshakable. I had enforced my boundaries. I had reclaimed my agency. I had reminded everyone, my sister, my parents, my extended family, that respect and accountability mattered more than convenience. By the end of the week, the tension had shifted. Amelia was no longer sending frantic texts, no longer expecting instant solutions. My parents no longer assumed I would handle everything.
And I?
I was free to exist in my own life, in my own rhythm, without the constant pressure of invisible labor. For the first time, I realized that empowerment wasn't about punishing anyone or demonstrating anger. It wasn't about making anyone feel small. It was about taking control of your life, creating boundaries, and refusing to be erased. And as I sat at my kitchen table one evening, coffee in hand, watching the city lights blink through my window, I understood something fundamental. Freedom isn't given.
It's claimed. And I had claimed mine.
The week after the contract was signed was quiet, almost eerily so. Amelia hadn't called me once, and my parents had stopped dropping by with their subtle urgencies. It was as if the world had finally realized that I was no longer a revolving door for everyone else's crises. The apartment felt lighter, calmer, and I reveled in the freedom that came from simply existing for myself. I spent the mornings at my favorite cafe, working on projects I had put off for years, savoring the luxury of uninterrupted time. For the first time, I noticed details I had never noticed before. The way sunlight spilled across the wooden tables, the soft chatter of strangers who didn't require anything from me, the aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with coffee. It was ordinary, mundane, and yet, it felt extraordinary. Meanwhile, Amelia's life began to shift, slowly but inevitably. Instagram posts hinted at the changes, pictures of her budget spreadsheets, occasional late-night study sessions, a few carefully captioned updates about learning independence. Friends commented with encouragement, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding behind the screen. And even though she had resources again, thanks to the structured repayment,
it was clear she was no longer coasting on invisible safety nets. Every small step she took required effort she had never had to give before. My parents tried subtly at first, testing the boundaries I had so carefully drawn. A text here, a hesitant visit there. "We just wanted to check in," my mother said one evening over the phone. I thanked her politely, told her I was busy with work, and left it at that. No explanation. No promises. And remarkably, the world didn't end. They adapted. By the middle of the second week, Amelia came to my door herself. She looked composed, her expensive jacket and polished shoes in place, but there was something different in her eyes, less entitlement, more calculation. "I just need a small favor," she said lightly, as though borrowing sugar. Her voice was calm, almost casual, but I had learned to read between the lines. This was her test. Could she elicit my old compliance with a single line, a well-placed smile? I laughed softly, a quiet sound, deliberate, unbothered. 2 weeks ago, that would have worked, I said. Not anymore. I didn't open the door. I didn't negotiate. I simply closed it, letting the click of the lock punctuate the lesson she needed to learn. I spent the next few days immersed in my life, work, friends, hobbies I had neglected. There were no emergencies, no last-minute calls, no frantic messages. It was astonishing how different life could feel when I wasn't carrying everyone else's burdens. My phone, once an endless stream of panic and obligation, became a tool for me again, not a leash. Then, just before the end of the third week, a message came from my mother, not urgent, not panicked. A simple note: "We've signed the repayments. Everything will be handled as agreed. No drama. No guilt. No manipulations. Just acknowledgement." I responded once, briefly. Understood. That was all it took. Amelia's Instagram updates continued, now tinged with a faint sense of reality. Photos of late-night studying, budget adjustments, and small accomplishments replaced the filtered nights out and oversharing she had relied on for validation. Slowly, she began to understand the boundaries I had set, even if grudgingly. I watched from a distance, unmoved, knowing my role had changed from fixer to observer. By the end of the month, the atmosphere in our family had shifted. No more jokes about the family ATM, no more casual assumptions that I would swoop in to save the day. My parents had adjusted, acknowledging in small ways that my cooperation was no longer automatic. Amelia had learned that independence required effort, not just expectation. And I? I had learned something deeper. My value wasn't measured by the crises I resolved. My love wasn't a service to be exploited. And my peace was worth more than any apology I could extract from them. Evenings became a time for me again. I cooked without interruption, read books I had postponed for years, and took long walks through the quiet streets. Each moment, unclaimed by family obligations, was a reminder of the life I had almost forgotten existed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was mine. And yet, despite the distance and the boundaries, I noticed something else, a subtle respect emerging. Not verbal, not effusive, but evident in their cautious words, in the measured tone of my mother's texts, in Amelia's careful steps toward independence. They were learning, slowly, that the woman who had carried their burdens for so long was no longer just a resource. They had to see me as a person. That realization, more than anything else, felt like triumph. Not over anyone, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as recognition. The recognition I had waited for years to receive, finally granted not by words, but by action, my own. I had stepped back, drawn lines, and enforced boundaries. And in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my life, but I had forced my family to confront their reliance on me. They would never see me the same way again, and I didn't want them to. That version of me, the endlessly accommodating, invisible Lena, was gone. In her place stood someone who could love, care, and give, but only on terms of respect and equality. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of my life finally belonged to me alone. Mornings were quiet and deliberate, evenings were calm and unclaimed by anyone else's crises. I woke up without the weight of expectation pressing down, without a phone buzzing incessantly with demands that were never truly mine to manage. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly unburdened. Amelia had adapted, slowly but noticeably. Her posts on Instagram became less performative, more grounded. I could see glimpses of real responsibility, her budget spreadsheets, the occasional study session, Even the small frustrations she shared candidly instead of exaggerating for attention. My parents, too, began to respect the boundaries I had drawn. There were no more casual requests disguised as conversation, no half-hearted attempts to guilt me into stepping back in. The family ATM no longer existed. Then, one Friday evening, Amelia showed up at my door. I had been reading, the soft glow of my lamp illuminating my apartment. She knocked lightly, hesitant, as if testing the waters. I knew what she wanted before she spoke. Her voice was careful, polite, attempting the casual tone she had used countless times to manipulate me in the past. "I just need a little help," she said, almost like asking to borrow sugar. I set my book down slowly, not rising to meet her gaze. "2 weeks ago," I said softly, almost gently, "that would have worked." I didn't open the door. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I let the click of the lock speak for me. This was not cruelty, it was the lesson she had avoided for years. Consequences existed now. Boundaries existed now. I was no longer the invisible safety net she had relied on. She lingered for a moment, shoulders slightly slumped, before walking away. I felt no satisfaction in her frustration, only a quiet affirmation that change had occurred. I was no longer responsible for her comfort. She would learn independence in the way that mattered, through experience, accountability, and effort. 2 days later, I received a message from my mother. Not panicked, not pleading, just simple acknowledgement. "We've sent the payments. Everything is handled as agreed. Thank you for holding to the terms." I replied once, "Understood." That was all. No guilt, no lectures, no apologies. Just recognition of boundaries. Life returned to a steady rhythm. I cooked meals for myself without interruption, worked late without distractions, and allowed myself moments of indulgence I had long postponed. I noticed details in life I had been blind to for years: the warmth of sunlight on my skin during an evening walk, the aroma of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, the laughter of friends that didn't demand my intervention. And as much as my family's dynamic had shifted, so had my perspective. I realized that my love, my care, and my time were valuable not because I gave them freely, but because I chose to give them with respect for myself first. Being dependable was no longer a liability. It was a choice I made consciously, not out of obligation or expectation. Amelia continued to navigate her independence, stumbling occasionally, learning humility and responsibility. I observed from a distance, offering help only when it was explicitly necessary and structured, never emotional labor, never silent bailouts. My parents adapted too, discovering that I was not infinitely malleable, that my generosity had boundaries. Slowly, respect replaced expectation, though it was quiet, subtle, and measured. Evenings became my own again. I would read, sip tea, and listen to music without interruption. The silence was no longer empty, it was alive with possibility. I had learned that empowerment wasn't about confrontation or punishment, it was about consistency, clarity, and refusal to be exploited. The world didn't need to notice. I didn't need applause. The peace I had carved out for myself was enough. I thought back to that fateful birthday dinner, Amelia tapping her glass, calling me the family ATM. I had once laughed it off, swallowed my pride, and continued covering for her. But this time, I had seen the truth. I had acted. I had set boundaries. And in doing so, I had reclaimed a part of myself that had been invisible for far too long. In the months that followed, I maintained my boundaries and independence. My parents never called me to fix an issue. Amelia reached out only to check in, never to demand. And I lived my life fully, without guilt, without obligation, without compromise on my peace. I had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Being loved is not the same as being useful. And I would never again confuse the two. That quiet evening, as I watched the city lights flicker through my window, I realized that I was free, not because anyone had forgiven me, or appreciated me, or acknowledged my sacrifices, but because I had finally recognized my own worth. I had stopped being invisible. I had stopped being a tool. I had become the center of my own life, and that, I realized with profound clarity, was the most powerful act of love I could ever give to myself.